The first thing which I usually talk about, I should also say that if anybody wants to have the slides on them as I go along the talk, they're available at ictd.umich.edu/ACCESS. So, and you have it up there on the board. So if you access, the last word, the indiscernible word is access. So ictd.si.umich.edu/access. So if you want to look at the alt text or change the fonts along as you need them, please go ahead. The reason why I start with the talk about the visibility of disability is for a lot of work around technology and disability in the developing world, when we talk about the workplace, the visibility of people with disabilities in the workplace is a big issue which often defines what kinds of work people can actually get. So you have this kind of channeling towards certain occupations which happens around the world, but especially in India and many parts of low and middle income countries, we find that certain jobs such as working in massaging, for instance, vending, or the other image which I have on the board right now, which is telephone operation. These kinds of jobs tend to be jobs that people are channeled towards, and this channeling can happen really early in their career, in their lives, right from their schooling. So the first study which we had done was about 176 people in India, Peru, and Jordan, looking at how people are channeled towards certain workplaces. And as we were doing this study, we came across the use of mobile technology as being increasingly important to people's articulation of what they felt was their social and economic scope in the societies they lived in. So that's when we decided to start working on the issue of mobiles and development. So, am I doing this or somebody else is doing this? Okay, anyways, so I was going to talk a little bit about the United Nations Convention and why that's important, but I think it's in the interest of time, we all know that the convention has several articles which are relevant to assistive technology, and basically what's happening right now is that your off-the-shelf mobile phone is becoming increasingly the primary form of accessible technology that people use. And what we're trying to do is figure out what impact that is happening on the way people's social and economic lives are changing. So, what did we do here? So what I have on the board is an image of a basic Nokia C-series phone, very popular among our respondents in India. So we did, in this study, 52 surveys and 15 in-depth interviews, and I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing after this point onwards. And what we found is among those, there were 58 phones, and only one of them was a non-Nokia phone. Now, this is unique to India, and I'll talk about why Nokia has such an important role to play here. I've eaten a bunch of popcorn now, and I think it's going to come out in the middle of the stuff for some reason. But anyway, so the key point here is that, besides my gluttony, is that the sample we have is highly skewed. So an issue with doing research around the use of access technology is that it's very hard to get any kind of large random sample, right? Because you're going to be working with that part of that population in that country which is wealthy enough or educated enough to even have access to some form of assistive technology. So really a lot of the studies that we do are done by snowballing. We find one person, then we contact a number of other people through them. And in addition to a survey, which basically looks at how much they're paying for the phone, what are the kinds of things they're using their phones for, we're doing in-depth interviews. And so in this talk, I'll talk about some of the key findings from the survey, but also a little bit about what are the narratives that people highlight. So the first thing that, as I say, is that as we keep up with the way the screen reconfigures itself, if this sample is actually highly skewed towards the fairly well-off people, fairly well-off blind people in India. So, for instance, when we were working with people in the National Association for the Blind, we were surprised at how many people who, as adults, were doing basic mobility training, which means that they have never, unto adulthood, actually left their home, and then thereafter they're being brought in from villages as part of campaigns by non-profits to then integrate into the workforce. And many of them don't even have access to basically walking on public streets. So even thinking about who is a mobile phone user automatically defines that the category, that the economic category of people that you're dealing with is much higher than the average rural user, for instance. And I think that this might be true for many other parts of the world. So we did a thematic analysis of the interviews of about 15 interviews, and we did it on 4 main themes. The first is we looked at independence. So we were looking at the transcripts of how often are people talking about mobiles giving them greater control over privacy, personal information, public spaces. We were looking at technology choices. Why are people choosing those mobile devices that they end up with? And are there any gender restrictions on what technology choices exist? The third thing we were looking at was device attachment. By this, we were looking at the sense of dependency on the mobile device itself. Are you willing to go out of the home without the mobile device? Are you willing to give up the mobile device? And the last thing we were looking at is socializing, and to the extent to which the mobile is seen as making the person, giving the person greater access to networks. Okay, the first part of the thematic analysis was on independence. I will read out the quote from one of the respondents from India, and in this he says, "I just showed it to my friend. He is right now a lawyer. So when I showed it to him, he was totally dumbfounded." So what I mean to say is that there was no reaction at all for a minute, so that they were not able to speak a word because they just could not believe their eyes. And then slowly questions started rising up. How to use a computer? How to use a cell phone? How do you understand the reaction? The reaction was very thrilling. In other words, even for somebody who's highly educated and in the workforce, the idea of a screen reader was so abstract that they couldn't believe that somebody who's blind can actually use a computer or a cellular phone to have access to some kind of digital information. Now, what this does is when the person is trying to enter the workforce, most employers are completely stunned. They don't know what to do with somebody who is blind. Like, what will you do at the workforce? How can you possibly use a computer? So those actually we found very low awareness of any kind of access technology in the public sphere, particularly in the workplace. So the second point was that of independence, and this kind of also around independence is also related to the previous quote that I made. And this is a female respondent. She says, when I lost sight, I did not know that screen readers existed. It was 10 long years when I came to know about screen reader software. Though I was staying in a well-developed area, i.e. defense area in Bangalore, I was surrounded by highly educated people, but even then I remained at home for 10 years without knowing that I can become independent. But now I feel now the situation is the same. Whenever people ask me seeing a laptop, they ask me what I'm doing, etc. So we had actually, even from this fairly small sample of 52 people, 3 females who stayed at home for over 2 years after losing their sight, not knowing about assistive technology. So essentially what we have is a situation where people with disabilities, or families with people who acquire disabilities don't even have others with disabilities in their networks. So when somebody actually acquires a disability, because there is no information coming through institutional sources, there just isn't a knowledge of what do you do next. And of course, the late life disability acquisition, there's a whole literature around this and complications around use of technology later. So, this was supposed to be a slide with this dramatic question which I was going to ask you, why men pay less than women for mobile phones. So this we found, and this was a significant result, that we found, one, men pay less than women, and second, women use a typical device longer than men. And when we were thinking about the answer is actually already on the phone, on the board, but I was going to have this dramatic. Why do you think that happens? And the reason why it happens is actually that men have much greater social networks than women from the sample of people that we interviewed. So essentially, if you're a woman with a disability, the family is more likely to put restrictions on your movement, and therefore you don't have access to, in particular, used phones as a market. And so then men end up getting much cheaper phones, and men are also more likely to get phones through acquaintances, which women don't have. We found issues around device attachment, again related to the point that I just made, is that we found that women were less likely to use used phones also because the phone itself is a way for the woman to show to her family that she can stay safe outside of the home. So then to have a phone which is not reliable was a bigger risk for a female than for a male in Bangalore, especially somebody who's using public transportation. What we also found is that the phone increasingly becomes a multi-purpose device. Of course, this is also findings which we're coming across in Costa Rica, where we're working right now, which is that a large number, 70% of people are using mobile on their phones and Bluetooth, but also a small percentage of people have started using GPS on their phones. What's also happening is things like Angel Recorder, where recording devices that people are using are now being done on the phone. But what's interesting is that those people who are actually doing a lot of these multitasking on the phones are not necessarily the poorest people who need to do it because they can't afford the recorder. It's actually those people who are most technologically advanced, so they can actually play around with newer features on the phone. We find also that piracy is pretty widespread on the phone. So copies of JAWS, for those of you who are aware of the software, is highly prevalent in pirated forms on most of the phones. And piracy, we found, has nothing to do with the person's ability to afford the software or the person's level of education. It basically has to do with whether or not the person can think that they can get away with pirating the software and whether or not the phone itself is new or used. A used phone is over twice, 2.5 times more likely to have pirated software on it. What's also interesting is that the software itself, because there is so much sale of used phones among people, among each other, those few softwares which are popular in one generation of phone users tend to get passed on to the next generation of phone users. So as a result, we found that Nuance Talks is the most popular software in India. And also there's a point which was made earlier by Dr. Khasnois about bundling of software. So most of the people bought the same phones because there was these NGOs which bundled Nokia phones with Nuance Talks for people who wanted them. Okay. Again, I'm running out of time, so I'm not going to go into this very much. Essentially, one of the key things that we find is that women talk about phones as being important to their families, but also women have a much higher increase in social circles. Now, when I say much higher, know that I don't have a large sample to actually base this on. This is anecdotal. But what's also important is that as people get on mobile phones, one important thing in their social network changes. Earlier, if you needed to have something fixed, you had to have somebody in your immediate social network to help you fix this. Now you can go online and go and post a question on a social network, and so then your sense of dependency on immediate social networks actually declines once you have access to cellular technology. Another little issue about phone management, we were trying to find out to what extent people are willing to replace their assistive technology. There was very high reluctance to replace any kind of assistive technology. This had to do with, again, asking somebody to help you do that. There is actually very little institutional development around, so people who were any kind of mobile phone users had really picked it up more or less by themselves or through their social networks, so people weren't exactly comfortable changing their software. I'm going to skip right to the last slide in which we're talking about what is the kind of work we're doing ahead. We've just completed work in Rwanda. I was actually reading the results of the study just as I was preparing for this talk. And right now we have ongoing work in Sierra Leone. Abs, who's sitting out there, has been helping us with this, in Costa Rica, South Korea, and Malawi. So looking at the cellular phone use in all of these countries. Really the main thing that we're doing here is creating narratives of assistive technology and social inclusion. I mean, we really think that the quantitative data that we're going to come up with is going to be very small, but the way of our purpose of using these surveys, these studies, is to have people talk about their use of technology and how it has affected their lives. We are looking at finally mobiles as a desktop replacement and whether or not this is happening. And finally, from a theoretical perspective, we're looking at this from a marginality lens and the intersection of being marginal by being a person with disability, as well as living in some form of economic deprivation. So in a nutshell, that's it. But what I can do is, if anybody wants, send me an email and I'll send you the paper. So thank you.
Thank you very much.